जी अस्सलाम वालेकुम, क्या हाल है? आप सबका ठीक ठाक है। इस वीडियो के अंदर हमने ये चीज़ देखनी है कि इंटरनेट के ऊपर आईपी एड्रेस और डोमेन नेम का क्या काम होता है और किस तरीके से कंप्यूटर इंटरनेट के ऊपर एक दूसरे को पहचानते हैं। It is very important to understand that on an internet computer they recognize each other by their IP addresses. So they don't know anything about any other computer except the IP address of each other. IP address is, if you want to understand, the IP address is a bit like a home address. For example, if you want to go to any home around the world, you need to know the address of that home to recognize that home. In a similar way, the machines on the internet, they can only recognize each other through the IP address. Other than the IP address, they don't know anything about any PCs, or any machines on the internet. So that's the only thing which helps them connect to each other. IP address also provide a kind of a way to differentiate different machines on the internet, because every machine has a unique IP address. This is the way, for example, in our home, if the two homes have a same address, then it would cause a confusion in reaching out to the home. In a similar way, if the two machines would have same IP address, then it would create a confusion in trying to communicate with them. So in the internet, every machine which is connected to the internet has a separate or a unique IP address which facilitate communication between them. So IP address, it stands for Internet Protocol, where we have already understood that protocol is a standard set of rules which are agreed upon by the parties who are involved in communication. Now IP address, it is actually a string of numbers where each number could be from 0 to 255. So it could be 255.255.255, and these numbers are always random. And there are organizations which manage and maintain and assign these numbers to different machines. So we got organization like IANA, which stands for Internet Assigned Numbers Authority, and then we got another organization which is called ICANN, which is Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. So they manage all of the assigning and giving out the IP addresses to different machines. So now I would explain that how can you check the IP address of your own machine. What you need to do is that if you click here and you type CMD, which is a command prompt, it would bring you a command prompt. Another way of bringing that in is in older PCs, if you press the key combination of a Windows button with the R, it would bring this, and you can type CMD in there and press OK, and it would bring up the CMD or command prompt for you. Now here, if you want to know the IP address of your machine, you just need to type in the command which is ipconfig, and it would bring up the IP address of the machine. So here you can see the current IP address of my machine. In a similar way, every site on the web, it has an IP address. For example, if I want to check the IP address of Google, I would say ping www.google.com. Is trying to get the IP address for it. You can see the IP address for that here. So at the moment is this IP address, and just remember that this IP address is dynamic IP. So every time you do it, it might come with a different IP address. So don't worry about that. So that means that every machine which is connected to our internet has its own IP address, and through this IP address, these machines, they identify and they interact with each other. So I've already explained you that you can check the IP address on your computer on a command prompt. When I type ping www.google.com, that www.google.com is not an IP address. That's actually an English name. Now, the thing we need to understand is that machines, they are good with the numbers, especially for a digital communication. This digital communication, it revolves around the numbers. So the machines, they are good with the numbers, but the humans, they are not very good with the numbers. So like a phone book, we have a domain name system where what we do is that we assign different English text to IP addresses, For example, in the case of a Google, we assign the name www.google.com, and the assigning of English names to different IP addresses is called domain name system. These English names are called host names sometimes also, or they're called domain names. The domain name, to repeat it again, is an English name for your domain. And we got companies who sell the domain name on charge. On internet, we also got domain name servers which perform the function of converting the domain names to their respective IP addresses anytime we submit our request. So every time you go onto a browser and you type the domain name, which could be www.udemy.com or www.google.com. So on the internet, we got our domain name servers. The job of those servers is to first recognize the domain name and then change it to a IP address before the communication of the internet could take place. So that's their whole duty. I know I'm repeating the concept again and again, but it's very important for your understanding that the PC which on an internet sends a request to a web server, that PC is called a client. And then the server which fulfills that request and sends the resources back to the client is called host. So we need to understand client and host machines on the internet and try to remember the difference between them. The reason I'm explaining that again and again, that if you want to make your own website and you want to host it, you need two things. First of all, you need hosting provider. Hosting provider is kind of a server, web server, which you're buying for yourself, which can host your website if you don't got your own server. So you can buy the server on a rent, which is called hosting provider, or which is called host machine. In a similar way, you have to buy a domain name for your website also.